"You don't belong here," Richard sneered, his voice echoing through the lavish boardroom. Sarah stood motionless, clutching her mop, the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne filling the air. The CEO's words hit her like a slap, his laughter cutting through the tension, but Sarah didn't flinch. He was used to seeing people like her, the janitors, the invisible ones. "Why don't you just clean up and leave the real work to us?" he mocked, turning away. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her gaze fixed on him. This wasn't just another insult. No, this time, it was different. As Richard went on, oblivious to the storm he'd just sparked, Sarah quietly set down her mop and took a deep breath. The wrong person had just been humiliated, and it was about to cost him more than he could ever imagine. Sarah Morgan had been working at the Hawthorne building for nearly 2 years, but every day felt like the first. She had never gotten used to the way people looked past her, as though she were invisible, a mere fixture in the background. Every morning, she entered through the service entrance, her uniform barely enough to shield her from the condescending glares of the executives. Richard Hawthorne was the worst of them all. His presence commanded respect, yet he treated her like a ghost. He never once acknowledged her as a person, only as a cleaner, a thing to be ignored. She'd overheard him talk down to her, belittle her, as if her sole purpose was to scrub the floors of his world. The tension had been building for months. She had been walking the fine line between surviving his mockery and keeping her head down, not wanting to cause a scene. But today felt different. Today something snapped. The words he'd spoken earlier echoed in her mind. Asterisk, "You don't belong here." Asterisk. Sarah clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stayed quiet for far too long, but not anymore. The world around her felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. The room went quiet as Sarah stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Richard looked up from his papers, a smirk curling on his lips. "What do you want, Morgan?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. The other executives around the table exchanged amused glances. Sarah's heart raced as she fought to keep her voice steady. "You're about to sign away everything, Richard," she said, her voice calm but sharp. Richard's smirk widened, and he waved her off. "Please, Morgan, do you think you know anything about business?" he sneered. The room erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt every pair of eyes on her, each glance a reminder of her place. She was just the janitor, after all. The humiliation washed over her, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step forward. "If you sign this, you'll lose everything," she said again, louder this time. Richard's expression faltered for just a moment, but it was enough. The laughter stopped, and the tension in the room thickened. Sarah had just made herself heard, and for the first time, the room wasn't laughing. The room was suffocating, the air thick with tension as Richard Hawthorne slowly stood up from the table. His eyes, once filled with mockery, now held a spark of something else: concern, confusion, maybe even fear. "You think you know better than me, Morgan?" he asked, his voice low and edged with frustration. The other executives, who moments ago had been laughing at Sarah, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The pressure mounted. Sarah could feel every eye on her, every whisper in the air. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, refusing to back down. Richard took a step toward her, his demeanor now more confrontational. "You don't belong here," he spat, his words like a dagger. "Get out of my way, or I'll make sure you regret this." His tone was sharp, dangerous even. But Sarah didn't flinch. "You're about to make a huge mistake," she said, her voice unwavering. "And I'm the only one here who can stop it." Richard's jaw clenched as he looked around the room. The pressure on him was building, and he didn't like it. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he retorted, but there was doubt in his eyes now. For the first time, Sarah saw it, a crack in his perfect armor. The moment hung in the air, electric with the possibility of a shift. It was clear, this was no longer just a misunderstanding. This was a battle for control. Richard took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "This is your last chance to walk away, Morgan," he said. His voice cold, sharp as a knife. Sarah stood her ground, her breath steady, but her pulse raced. For a moment, Richard hesitated, his hand frozen mid-air as he reached for the papers on his desk. The room fell silent. His eyes flickered briefly to the door, then back at Sarah. It was the first sign of doubt she'd seen from him. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but carrying a weight of certainty that filled the space between them. Richard's hand dropped. He looked at her for a long, tense moment, and in that silence, something shifted. He wasn't so sure anymore. The smug confidence in his eyes faltered, just for a second. That was all it took. Sarah could see the doubt growing in Richard's eyes, the once unshakable so, and now standing before her, uncertain for the first time in a long while. The room was still, the silence almost suffocating as the weight of the moment settled over them all. Richard shifted, clearly uneasy. His fingers brushed against the stack of contracts, but his gaze lingered on Sarah, as if trying to find the right words to dismiss her, to prove she was just a janitor after all. But something in her posture, the way she stood firm despite his power, made him hesitate. She wasn't just a cleaner. That much was obvious now. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but stopped short when Sarah stepped closer to the desk, the sound of her shoes clicking on the marble floor louder than ever. "You think you're the only one who can play the game of power?" she asked quietly. Richard's eyes flickered, confusion flashing across his face. He knew she wasn't just a janitor now. The knowledge hit him like a wave, but he couldn't quite place it. There was something about her that felt familiar, something he should have noticed long ago. Sarah's eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "You've underestimated me, Richard, but I can still fix your mess." The hint of her true identity hovered in the air, just beyond his grasp. The mistake was already made. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The moment of realization hit Richard like a freight train. Sarah didn't just know the business. She had been part of it all along. With a small, almost imperceptible movement, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a badge. The gold emblem gleamed under the lights, catching the eyes of everyone in the room. "I'm not just the janitor, Richard," she said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "I'm the lead financial strategist for the firm that's about to acquire this company." Richard's face went pale as the truth hit him. He had been so consumed with his own arrogance that he had failed to recognize the signs, to see that Sarah was more than she appeared. She wasn't just cleaning the floors. She was the one who could take everything he had built and tear it down in an instant. His mind raced, but he couldn't find the words. "I could have let you sign it," Sarah continued, her eyes cold and unwavering. "But you've made your mistake. Now, you'll have to live with it." The room was silent, and for the first time, Richard Hawthorne truly understood the power of the woman he had so carelessly dismissed. The weight of his mistake crashed down on Richard as Sarah turned to leave. The room was still, the silence almost deafening. Richard's fingers trembled as he reached for the contract, but the truth was already clear. He had been outplayed, outsmarted, and humbled by the one person he had underestimated. He had lost control, and it was too late to fix it. Outside, the morning sun streamed through the windows, but in that moment, Richard Hawthorne knew he would never look at the world the same way again. Karma had found him, and there was no escaping the consequences of his arrogance. Sarah didn't need to say another word. Her silence was all the closure he needed.